Okay, welcome everyone to the Gladstone Ad-Hoc Tree Board meeting for July 12th. We'll start off with introductions. If you could make sure you turn on your microphone when you talk during the meeting, that would be very helpful for the minutes within that. So why don't we start off with you, Eric?
Eric Butler, I'm here on behalf of the Parks and Rec Board.
Nancy Eichstead, Gladstone citizen.
Justin Prouty, Portland General Electric.
Sandy Dittmar, Gladstone citizen.
Brittany Oxford, Oregon Department of Forestry's Urban and Community Forestry Program.
Darren Canaproli, Public Works Director for the City of Gladstone.
And Jackie Batts, City Administrator.
Okay, so the last meeting, the agenda looks very similar to this meeting. We went over the survey questions in this meeting last time, and we kind of gave a homework assignment to come up with any more questions that anybody had for the survey. We sent out an email on that. We didn't receive any additional questions or changes in any of the questions. So I guess if we have any additions to that, we'd like to get this finalized today. And to be honest with you, I think we should be able to finalize everything on the agenda today. So I'll open it up to if anybody has any questions that they would like to add for the survey.
I think the questions are fine. I'm wondering how this is going to be distributed because that's going to make a difference in how it's laid out and what the options are. And I would also wonder if we should define urban trees for our citizens, or as opposed to public and private trees, because we want to make sure they know that we're not talking about private trees.
So I think looking at my notes regarding the survey, one, we're going to put it in the August newsletter with a link to the online survey or list where people can get a paper copy. We're going to have it on the city's website, at the community center, at the library, City Hall, at Public Works. And at the city's community festival booth, we're going to hand out the survey. So those were the areas that I had that we identified at the last meeting.
That is correct.
Okay.
So it'll be paper and electronic, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't really have many comments. I think the questions are fine for the most part. My main comment was just that I think the rating scale would be important for this, like ranking each of these kind of topics of level of importance to you. I think it'll help you guys direct, what citizens are feeling, where they want resources to go. The only question may be the tree preferences one, and this might be like my arborist brain thinking. I think if you ask that question, everyone's going to just say they want flowering trees, and you're going to get stuck with like just a bunch of plums and cherries and things like that. You're not going to get a lot of diversity. It still may be a question you want to leave in there, but just my experience in the past is that if people don't know much about trees, they want to put like all crepe myrtles in, and that's what you'll be stuck with if you're going to use the feedback you get from residents.
So maybe are you suggesting that we don't put examples in that question, or just leave it, what types of trees do you prefer in your neighborhood? Or
yeah, that could help. Honestly, I don't have that big a problem. I just know there's a tendency to people like flowering trees, and it might limit, if you're really trying to increase your canopy, you're going to want larger trees and things like that to help with that goal. And just something that popped into my head.
And then are you also talking about like each question, like a 1 to 5 as importance type of a thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
or 3, 1 through 3 rating scale preference. Before I forget, Nancy, you mentioned urban. Are you talking about under number 7?
The very top sample questions, you're not going to say sample questions, or you're going to have some kind of introduction, but you might have terms like urban defined so that people understand what it is we're trying to do. We're not going after their trees. I don't know if there's any other terms.
Public trees, public, yeah.
Yeah.
public trees versus private trees. There's urban forest. What is that?
So these questions were AI generated, and when we produced them, we said they're very generic. And so I think what we will do is make them more specific for Gladstone, so we can remove or define urban. Brittany, do you have any suggestions? I know public, we want to be clear that we're dealing with public trees.
Yeah, I would suggest maybe instead of regarding urban tree canopies, you could say residents' desires regarding publicly owned trees in Gladstone. Because that's what we're talking about. Does that help, Nancy?
Yeah, I think so. One thing a survey does besides collecting information is that it informs. So this is just another tool to help people understand what we're doing.
I think starting the survey with just kind of a paragraph, talk about why we're collecting this information, kind of giving some background and what's going on here, I think would also help people understand the questions more and give answers that are more useful to what we're looking for.
So are you thinking like the purpose statement?
Exactly. It's like the purpose statement could be more descriptive about the intention behind the survey and what our goals are, beyond just kind of saying we're asked about urban trees.
Yeah, because I think this information is going to be helpful for when we apply for grant funding too, to understand. So
Under equity and access, do you think that's a yes or no? Would you, if someone said no, wouldn't you want to hear what a comment on that?
I think that's what the second part of that question is how can we ensure that all residents benefit from urban trees? But we could have like an option, like if no, then explain.
Or why or why not?
Yeah, not all of these are scale questions. Some are yes, no, and some are open-ended.
I think having a plan for how to tabulate and analyze these responses afterwards is going to be helpful as well. So that'll help inform some of the ways that we structure the answers, but kind of knowing what we're going to, or having an idea about what we're going to do with this information as we collected.
Anything else on the survey questions? No? All right. Let's move on to the website content. So in your packet that we provided you is a paper copy of the website that has been updated with fixing Nancy's name. We've added the purpose and mission to it. It's also on the screen behind Justin there too, if you wanted to look at it that way. So really, we added the purpose and the mission. We added the links that we had from the last meeting. Nobody really sent any other links from the email that was there that we had sent out. But from the last meeting, we had put those links onto the website. And the one link that I know that Nancy had mentioned was the white oak savannas or white Savannah oak. And we couldn't find a link for that. And I thought you were going to send us a link and we didn't have that.
I wanted the Portland plant list
That's on there.
and that's on there. I don't know about white oak, so I guess I need to find one.
Yeah, I mean, we looked up And there was a couple of them, but I didn't know what exactly it was you were looking
Okay,
for. So
I
we
apologize. I
didn't
dropped the ball.
add a link for that. If that's something you want, if you could provide us with a link, we'll be more than happy to get that on
Okay,
there.
White Oak Savannah was my note.
Yeah.
I'll try to find a local one, not a
Yeah.
national one.
Yeah. And I mean, even if the website is published and that's not on there, we can still add it at another time.
Okay,
And that's the same for any links. If you come up with other links as we're going through all of this and would like to have it on the website, we can add that at any time. So it's not like we absolutely have to have it now. I think the main thing here is to get as much information on there as we can and then publish it. And then we can add to as needed. So.
What was this link about the white oak? What did it involve?
white oak savannas are rapidly disappearing historical habitat that goes way back in time. And the valley's white oak savanna stems from Eugene all the way to Seattle. And it's been disturbed, obviously. But the white oak savanna was, there was a practice of Native Americans burning it, sometimes lightning burned the vegetation below the trees, but the white oaks managed to survive all that burning. And they did it for management and they're actually burning understory now in different forestry practices. But it's something that's historically and culturally accurate. And Gladstone is a white oak savanna. If you look around and see how many Gary or Jerry oaks there are in town, I think it's important for us to know what our place is in that part of history. Across the river, the Westland preserved a white oak savanna that's next to 205. And they're a bit like the nature park in that they do activities up there to help kids restore it and to bring it back to its former glory. Has a specific number of native plants that you would always find in a white oak savanna, like poison oak, camas, things like that.
So that link just tells the white oak story.
Yeah, there's lots of them. I'll find the best one. It won't be like a little local one. It'll be something that some, state department or whatever is managing, so it doesn't go away quickly.
So I'm involved in that world, and so I know some really good ones. The Intertwine Alliance has really good one on their website. Cascadia Prairie Oak Partnership, Oregon Fish and Wildlife. There's a lot of different information sources out there about oak and prairie habitats. So I can send a couple good ones along.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could send anything that is not on here now that you would like to see on here. If you could send that to myself or Kristen, and then we'll be able to get it up on there. We want to get this published, obviously, so that people understand what we're doing and why we're here. And we're pretty much right there. So does anybody have anything on here that jumps out at them that you would like to adjust or change? What is the tree board was already on there and it's been on there. Who's on the tree board was on there. We just added the purpose and then the links, and we removed our tree list that was originally on there. That has been removed. So.
I think you also removed some of the section about like choosing a tree and things like that. I happen to have an old copy here.
Oh, okay.
So, but yeah, for me, I think this looks good. I think it informs everyone on what they need.
Yeah, I think it's a living document, and with having a work session on the 23rd with council, it'd be nice to have this published by then so that we can go over it with them and then we can keep adding information.
Is it a good idea or not to be having these other lists of approved trees on here? Will people think that's the list? Are we leading them in the wrong direction? I'm not sure.
I think as long as it's clear that it's like a resource document, and not like it might be used to inform decisions that the tree board is making and not like written into city code.
Is there a way to make a statement to that effect on the website?
Yes, we can add some verbiage above the related links that talks about these are resources. They're not approved by the city of Gladstone.
So is our list going on here? Are we going to have a list? Gladstone?
Yes, as soon as you're done with the draft ordinance, the next assignment was we're going to start working on the updating the tree list.
Okay.
But the current one's not going on there because it was so old that we decided let's not put it on there. Let's just put the Clackamas County approved street list on there. And I look for you to start working on that at your next meeting in August.
Mhm. Anything more on the website content? No? All right, let's move to the draft ordinance. So the ordinance that was sent out to you and the ordinance that I had printed and is in front of you are the same. We received comments from Justin, Brittany, Sandy, and Eric. I went through the ordinance and made some of the, I guess we'll call them simple changes. But there's quite a few that didn't get changed because I think we need more clarification, or maybe I need more clarification is probably the best way to put that. My thought is I can go through the list of the questions where they are in the document, and then we can, discuss how we want to add that or not add that. Does that seem reasonable to everyone? All right. There may be some duplicates in here, but hopefully we can get through that. One of the comments was under definitions. The question is we may want to include language about invasive or damaging pruning. This is a separate definition in some ordinances. And I think there was another question in there too from somebody else that, I think it was Brittany. There was several spots where, we should have a definition. We should have a definition for that. Without going through all of them on Brittany's side, because she'll be next. But I don't see that would be an issue as far as adding more definitions in there. But I didn't want to just willy-nilly put them in there and then have, oh, well, we don't want that or need that. So that was one thing that was brought up on Justin's had brought that one up. Under tree planting standards, requirements of franchise agreement company or utility companies, that's number 2. Justin's comment was, should this be in this section? And I guess my question back to you would be, is where should it be if it's not there?
Yeah, I think this is language that came from the draft ordinance, and that what most all cities have. That's where they place their franchise utility companies language.
So I guess what confused me is saying, you're talking about maintenance of public trees for utility clearance. That doesn't seem to be a planting standard, right? Like I for the utility that I work for example, right? It's like we're maintaining trees under the power lines, right? Keeping them clear for state, and just reliability, safety purposes. We plant trees sometimes as like a mitigation thing if we have to do a removal or things like that. I don't know if I understood how that related to utility work in this case.
I think maybe an alternative is that we put language in here about utility standards under planting and public tree care. Because I think that is a good point, like where you plant the tree and the proximity to lines is one thing, and then maintenance of trees that are already under power lines is a different thing, so.
Yeah, and I think there's a section, like it goes in there with the distance from curbs, streetlights, utilities, et cetera. Like that's covered there in number 5, right? Where it talks about the, the distances and things like that from different hardscape, fire hydrants, other utilities and things like that. So I think we're covered there. Yeah, and I think there was something else too that says elsewhere in the document that utilities are to maintain power, trees away from their facilities, right? So
Yeah, there is another spot.
yeah, I'm not sure exactly where that is. It just seemed redundant and maybe didn't fit in with the rest of the tree planting stuff.
So are you thinking that that should be removed from there because it's kind of covered under number 5 or number 5?
Yes, yeah, I think we cover the clearance issues. I think there was still an issue with that. Actually, you made that change. Yeah, I think it covers the pruning aspect of it. Yeah.
So we're deleting 2 under tree planting.
I think I would agree with that, because in our approved street tree list, it'll have standards for what can and can't go under utilities.
Okay. Okay, the next one is under public tree care number 1. Sandy also had a comment on this one. One comment was, will you require a permit for property owners to trim public trees? And then what does that look like? As far as public trees in the planter strip, that type of a thing, I don't see a permit being provided for that. We would have, well, number 1, I think what you would have is a bunch of people not knowing they need to have a permit and they're just going to do it anyway. And number 2, if everyone's putting every time they want to prune something on a street tree, we're going to have permits galore. So I don't think that necessarily for the pruning of the tree that's necessary, at least in my opinion. But I think if a tree is going to be removed or planted, which is later in the document, then yes, a permit would be required for that. And then Sandy's comment, where are Sandy's? Where's that is? So Sandy's comment was, states there need to be clear. I believe that's under this. Maybe it isn't tree pruning. Oh, this is tree care. Oh, currently think it's blurry. It states that the city can do it, or a required landowner to do it. A resident would read this and think as the city doing it as the first option, and that isn't the case. So basically what you're saying is that people read it, they think it's the city that's going to be doing the work when it's not. That's clearly not the case. It's going to be the property owner doing the work, and that I'm assuming you're wanting that to be more defined.
I think people are going to read that as they want to read it. And that's going to be, oh, the city will take care of it. I think that's where people will go. So maybe a little different phrasing there would be beneficial.
Or maybe to address that under public tree care, you could have like who's responsible for public trees as a first, and then the city may, because it says may, not will.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you're right. It says that the city may do it, or they may require the adjacent property owner. So yeah, maybe clearly defining
People will read that how they want to.
Yeah, who exactly is gonna,
Yeah.
like, what's the first call? Like, it sounds like most of the time it will be the adjacent property owner, but there's cases obviously where the city may have to elect. It's their, you own the trees in the end, right? So still reserve that right for yourself.
Number 2 says the city may do it. But, if number 1 said a little more of it's your responsibility.
Okay, any more with that one? The next one is under tree pruning, number 4. The comment is there currently a franchise agreement with the city? This is from Justin. And the answer to that is yes, there is currently a franchise agreement. So I don't know that there's really anything that needs to happen with that. I think the way that it reads is fine. If we didn't have a franchise agreement, obviously, then that would change that. And then we're under,
Back up just a
Mhm.
second. Pruning,
oh, that's right.
It
you
does
had a
not-
question.
it does not say
one.
that you have to have a licensed professional do pruning. Is that the way you want it? I don't read that it says that. It just says it has to be in conformance with standard pruning standards.
I mean, for kind of routine care pruning, you don't necessarily need a top level professional. And if it's just like removing dead branches or things like that, stuff that anyone can kind of learn how to do themselves.
I agree. I just wasn't sure if that's what was desired, that anybody can be out there with their shears.
Yeah, I actually made a comment under tree pruning about just considering differentiating between large pruning and structural pruning that can be done with hand pruners or handsaw. I feel like those things, as long as you say in accordance with standards, homeowners can do that themselves. Whereas larger projects, obviously you'd want an arborist to do that work.
So basically define what the different types of pruning and who can do what.
Yeah.
So if a chainsaw's involved, I mean,
Yeah.
where do you draw the line?
Yeah, I'd say like climbing a loft into a tree would be like a good time where you probably need a professional. Yeah, and I think that's kind of with my first question of like, will there be permits required? Is like, I think there does need to be some sort of definition of like, what is the level before like, yeah, the homeowner can go out there with some loppers. And I've seen ordinances in the past where they really like City of Portland, for example, like to prune relatively small things on a street tree, you need to get a permit. And people either A, ignore that, or they find out the hard way and they get some citation and it makes a lot of bad blood. And I don't think a small town like Gladstone wants to go that route. But just making it a little bit more clear, you don't have to have permits. I don't think you're a small enough town that I think that's fine and that's probably reasonable. Just making it clear when they might get a knock on the door from your code enforcement or something like that if they've gone too far. Just helping the residents out.
Yeah, as long as the pruning doesn't like hinder the health of the tree, I guess is the way that we're differentiating that.
Yeah, I think kind of on that note, going back to definitions, it might be worth kind of defining sort of severe improper pruning as being a form of damage as well.
Yeah, like we've kind of moved away from that no more than a third of the canopy to like no more than necessary. I think that's too ambiguous for homeowners though, but that's still a general rule of thumb we use. If you're removing more than a third of the live canopy, that would be destructive pruning.
And again, as I'm assuming that that's there in the ANSI standards we're referring to.
Okay, and then Sandy, you had a question on, actually it was on tree pruning number 1. States there needs to be clear space of 13 feet above the street surface or 9 feet above the curb line. The Ad Hoc board webpage states that keep the tree trim to 14 feet above sidewalk level. Need to get consistent between these two documents. I think what did I do with that?
Okay, arborists recommend street trees be replaced every 15 to 25 years. We talked about taking that out. For clear vision, keep trees trimmed to 14 feet. And then here we're saying 13. We just make it consistent, pick one or the other.
Right, and that has been removed from the website.
You took out the whole thing?
Yes.
Then, okay.
Any more on that? Where are we at?
I did have a couple on tree pruning, where we are talking about ONSI standards. It could be good to also add safety and tree care operation standards, as well as local and state safety regulations. And then, oh, I guess under like when we're talking about the city shall have the right to prune any tree, is the homeowner gonna be responsible for the cost of that work if the city's doing it on street tree? Or I guess, how do you envision that?
We would only come in and do that if it's a site issue.
Okay,
So if it's blocking signs or anything like that, that'd be the only time that we would come in. If there's a branch possibly hanging down too low and
Mhm.
people are hitting it as they walk by, that type of a thing, we would take care of that.
Mhm.
If it's a matter of height on the street side, depending on what we're talking about, a lot of the times for us, it's with the street sweeper coming through.
Mhm.
If it's low like that, depending on how much has to be cut, if it's just a branch or something like that, we take care of it ourselves. But if it's more in-depth pruning or something like that, it would go to we'd send something to the property owner, letting him know that.
So I might try to include language around that in this section.
Which section are you referring to, Brittany? Are you
It's number
in
3.
public tree care or,
Is number 3 under tree pruning?
okay, tree pruning?
Darren, do you guys do that now? If you have a tree that's needs pruning, is that how you're handling it?
Yeah, for the
Mhm.
most part, we currently do that.
And that's pretty standard.
Did you have any more on that? You've got it up that way. I don't have to go back through and look. It's actually helping.
Yeah. I don't have anything else on the tree pruning, but I do
Okay.
have in other sections.
No, that's fine. So I guess the next section would be tree removal. Justin had a comment under E. It had to do with view of traffic signs, need distance to view the traffic signs. That's kind of a tricky one. And the reason I say that is like take a stop sign, for example, you need to be able to see that stop sign at least 150 feet before you get to the stop sign. So how do you tell somebody, oh, well, it needs to be pruned back this far when, do you tell them go stand in the middle of the street 150 feet away? You know what I'm saying? It makes it it's kind of a difficult, I see where you're going, but it makes it more difficult to be able to tell somebody how to go about doing that.
Yeah, so that I was actually referring more for the distance of visibility, right? Not the
Oh.
distance of the cut. So like I know like in cities I'd worked in, it was like dependent on speed and stuff like that. So it was like maybe 50 feet for certain signs, stop signs, yeah, being like 100 feet or something like that. So it could get a little dense and confusing to residents.
Sorry, can I ask a
go
question
for it.
about that?
Yeah.
Do you all have like standards somewhere that's not in tree code that talks about obstruction for
I believe in the MUTCD has that,
Okay.
which is the Federal Highway
Mhm.
manual. And it is, I'd have to look again, but the last time I looked, it was 150 feet from using a stop sign as an example. Obviously, no parking, a regulatory sign is the way to put that. If you're coming up on a corner and there's a corner sign, and it has a speed of 30 or something like that, you need to be able to see that in advance of.
Mhm.
And I believe the magic number for that's 150 feet. And we could add, some verbiage there that says that. I just don't want it to be too
Rigid.
Yeah,
I agree.
because you say sign, well, it's not every sign. But maybe we can massage that a little bit and use the word regulatory sign, but then you got to define what's a regulatory sign. It can be a little tricky.
Mhm.
Or just refer to regulations.
Yeah, just put a link to whatever standards you guys are already using now. And just, it's the type of thing, you're just going to get calls from residents on it. They're going to need guidance on it. That's just
Mhm.
how it's going to go there.
Yeah, I actually think a lot of communities where I've read ordinances do it similar to this. And I think to Darren's point, it's maybe important to try to keep that flexibility in here. 'Cause it's balance for sure.
Yeah. Under number 3, under the same category, Justin's comment was a method for determining cost may need to be established. If a tree is removed from the subject area without director approval. So, and I think later, or it's down below under violations and penalties. I wonder if we could do, refer to, and then have that down there.
I do know that we had talked about changing that violation and penalty to be the appraised value of the tree. And that was going to be one of my questions as to whether or not we wanted to remove the amount and change the definition of that. So if we are going to refer people to that, we'll just want to make sure to cover this when we get to that section.
Right.
I definitely agree with the appraised value of the tree. I'd also consider cost of like establishment care, other things that might go into replanting. If you're also requiring them to replant the tree. And then some communities have an option for a mitigation fund. If you're unable to replant somewhere that a tree is removed for some reason. I don't know if you want to get into that.
Yeah, and that was definitely the spirit of that question is like, yeah, are we doing appraised value? Are we doing reasonable replacement and installation? Is like tree evaluation is extremely complicated. I don't really understand it at all. That's one qualification I've never been able to wrap my head around, but removal and replacement might just be the easiest standard for 3-inch caliper tree and a standard kind of cost of labor. You can find, I've used stuff like, it's like Department of Labor, like the federal kind of wage standards for like what a laborer would cost to do something like this. And you kind of build that into the total cost. And as Brittany mentioned, having that in lieu sort of fee instead of having them do that as an option, I think is a good thing. But standardizing that, if you don't have it standardized, people will fight you all day on it and they won't comply to it.
Yeah. And I guess on that topic, if we're talking about number 2, under the circumstances listed above in section 9, you can approve the removal of trees or replace the tree. I guess whenever we're thinking about replacement, we want to make sure that it's a similar size class tree. Like we don't want to be removing large conifers and replacing them with dogwoods, right? So that's, I guess, just something to try to keep in mind in this like removal section, is that we're kind of replacing canopy, not one individual tree, because not all trees are created equal.
What's section 9? It references section 9, but I couldn't find that.
Yeah, so the original document had
That's
the
what I
numbering was
figured.
different and everything like that. So once we get everything set, we'll renumber everything and then it will
Okay.
refer to that section.
So
that
it's,
number
it,
is.
in this current document, it would be section 1 that it would be referencing. Is that correct?
Removal.
The removal of trees, then there's a 1 and an A through G, and then there's a 2. So it would be section 1.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So we're talking about everything above that. If a tree comes out for whatever reason, does that tree have to be replaced? Is that what we're saying here? Is that what a homeowner would read?
I would say yes, but possibly you couldn't necessarily, not always would you be able to replace it with a like tree.
Correct.
Because let's say take a planter strip, for example, and somebody has planted something that's way too large for that, as we've all discussed.
Mhm.
You know, you don't want to put the same tree back in there. So
Exactly.
and that kind of alludes to what Brittany was saying is like for like, not always will it be that
Mhm.
way.
And I don't think a minimum of 3-inch caliper, I don't know that that's realistic.
Yeah, that's going to be hard to find.
It's going to be hard to find. It's going to be cost prohibitive and difficult to maintain after it's planted to get it established. That's a big tree. So I would opt for,
Well, and you could have some street trees that may never have a 3-inch caliper too, depending on the type of tree and the size of space that
Mhm.
you're putting it in.
yeah, I think that needs to come out.
So just remove the
Just-
minimum of 3-inch.
Yeah, just a suitable tree.
Yes. a suitable tree.
So a word of caution there is usually that 3, you might be able to get away with 2, but if you start planting much smaller trees, like something you can go buy at the Home Depot or something like that, they won't make it. People will damage them intentionally, unintentionally, and things like that. And I assume this came from some other code. That's usually why they include it. If it doesn't work for Gladstone, I think that's fine. Just a word of caution on
That'd be that
removing
big.
that. Yeah, I mean, those are from a tree nursery or from a landscape place. I think you could find commercially available 3-inch caliper trees, but I won't die on that hill. But
I
just
think
yeah.
You need some kind of standard though, or somebody will go stick a seedling in there and call it good.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree that there
Yeah.
needs to be a caliper minimum, but maybe we readdress what that caliper minimum is, and I can make some recommendations for that.
Okay.
In 1F, private property owners have duty to remove trees on their property. Isn't the attention of this just to be in public spaces? Maybe it's adjacent property.
Well, this I think is specifically talking about nuisance trees.
Yeah. And it's also private property trees. This ordinance isn't covering private property trees unless it's a nuisance.
Yeah, so I think with the private property trees, it's only regulated if in certain situations, and this would be one of those situations.
So under the circumstances listed above, and that's one of the listed above, it says the director has to approve it.
So you'd have to approve the removal of nuisance trees
On
it.
private property.
So I read that as the director is determining that there's a nuisance tree and can compel a private property owner to remove the nuisance tree.
Well, what's private property if it's an easement?
An easement is still technically the property owner's space. We have an easement that goes through it, or could possibly have an easement that goes through it. You can still use the land, but let's say we have a water line that runs through that easement, we're going to need to have access to that easement.
So there's a clerodendron on the corner of Beatrice and 82nd Drive, and it's gone crazy. It's shooting up sprouts all over the place. That's those apartments that are right there, sort of across from Safeway.
Okay, yeah. I'm not sure.
Berkeley, I think you mean.
Berkeley, you're right. Whose job is it then to deal with that tree?
It depends on, well, ultimately it would be the property owners, because if it's in the right of way, it's their responsibility. And if it's on private property, it's their responsibility.
I think there's a lot of confusion about all of that.
Yeah, I think I know
And-
the spot you mean. That's Tree of Heaven. That's even worse.
Yeah, yeah. And so people just pretend it's not their problem.
All right, where are we at now? Dun, dun. Do you have any more on this page, Brittany?
Yeah, sorry, I do.
Okay, no, yeah, you're fine.
So we're under removal of trees.
Yes.
I guess the first comment that I had is under number 1 at the sort of end sentence. It says, substance which is harmful to such trees to come into contact with their roots or leaves. I would just suggest also adding or any other part of the tree, just to kind of cover.
I may have added that
Oh,
already.
did you?
I think I did.
It says or any other.
Okay, great.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was one of them that I actually had changed.
And then under B, the tree is dead or dying and its condition cannot be reversed prior to removal. The condition of the tree must be confirmed in writing by a licensed arborist.
That's been changed.
Okay,
That's certified ISA, sorry, certified arborist.
okay,
That's been changed throughout
Okay.
the document.
great.
Can I jump in there real
Sure.
quick? Because one of the comments I had in there was the guidelines for those reports. Do you think you'll include that in or add it in an addendum, like what the arborist report would actually look like, what those standards are? I don't know. We might open up a big can of worms.
I think the ISA has their own standards for that.
Yeah, that's fair.
So we
That's true.
don't necessarily need to include that as long as we're saying they're certified and
Yeah.
following correct protocols.
I like it.
I did have another question under G. It says no removal of historic or landmark trees, but I don't think that's been defined anywhere. Like what makes a tree historic or a landmark tree? So maybe just adding that to the definitions or removing it if you don't have.
We do have one and we talked about it at the last.
Oh, that's right.
Meeting, and I think the language that we were gonna add was the state of Oregon, the powwow tree is a landmark tree.
Oh, so they're Oregon State historic trees and not the city of Gladstone.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I would just define that in the definitions then. But I think that's great to have. I already made that comment. Oh, okay. And then I guess my next comments are about removal of stumps.
And I believe I added.
Did you add that?
I
Okay.
think I did. I'm
I'll
pretty sure
stop
that I did. No, you're fine.
re-saying my comments. Then that's all I had on that section. Oh, you did add that. Thank you.
Yes. I thought I did. You good?
Yep.
And I think that's all that Justin had. I think we've answered all of Sandy's. And then, did you have any more on any of the other ones, Brittany? I made quite a few of the changes. It was just, there was a few in there that I wanted to kind of bring up as the board.
Yeah, I think this is a great first draft. I guess overall, just some of the adding additional definitions so that everything referenced has a definition.
Yeah, let's go through those.
Yeah.
Let's go through, because there was one at the very beginning too. So under definitions, what do we want to add?
So I think the ones I had suggested was utility, tree, historic landmark tree, a plant, public rights of way, parking strip, public grounds, public streets, licensed arborist, and hazard or hazardous tree. And then if you did end up putting in my comments about establishment care, putting a definition for establishment care.
Do you have her recommended definitions written down somewhere?
I have these. So she had says private property is not mentioned in the ordinance. Please specify when action can happen on private property is one of them. And then, which is up above in the purpose. And then under number 2, which is definitions, consider adding following definitions: utility, tree, shrub, historic landmark tree, plant, public rights of way, parking strip, public grounds, public streets, licensed arborist or arborist, hazard or hazardous trees, public space, place, establishment care.
I think if we're replacing all references to licensed arborist with ISA certified, then that takes care of that one.
Yeah.
Backing up to removal of trees, C just says licensed arborist. Should that be ISA certified as the
Yes,
other
it
places
should.
do?
What was that under?
2C, removal of trees,
Oh, removal
excuse me,
of
yeah,
trees.
1C.
See, thank you.
Maybe defining ISA then, in the beginning.
At least giving the full name once before the acronym.
Okay. And then I think Justin had one to add to that as well under definitions, which was about excessive, what is it? About excessive or damaging pruning. There should be a separate definition in some ordinances, so we can add that in there as well.
We're including that within the definition of damage.
Yeah, that's what I,
Okay,
Yeah, that's a
so
good way
not
of
worry
going
about
about
that.
that.
Anything else?
Do we need to add anything on easements? I mean, I don't know specifically what it would be, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that.
Could you reference back to other parts in the city code? Like, I'm sure that's somewhere.
Yeah, there,
So-
there is documentation for that. I mean, we could look at that and see what that actually states in there. As far as what is an easement. And then it would, because my understanding is an easement is the property owner's property, but we have the right to go through that property. So if a tree is planted on an easement, it's still the property owner's tree. It's not a right of way because it's private property. So what we're dealing with is right of way, which is public property that is maintained by the adjacent property owner. an easement, a tree on an easement is still the property owner's tree, and it is still their responsibility. If a utility company or the city needs to go through that easement and do whatever it is, and said tree gets damaged, that's where it's a little gray, I would say,
Mhm.
because a lot of the times it's still technically the property owner's responsibility because they planted the tree in the easement or the tree was in the easement. I don't know of too many people that would, or too many utilities that would just come in, whack down the tree and never put anything back. I mean, that's not very good practice, and it's not a practice that we do, but it may be a good idea to maybe define that a little bit.
I guess one way of doing that is just having like who's responsible for public trees versus private versus these different situations somewhere in the tree ordinance.
Yeah, we may get into like the land use weeds if we go
Mhm.
like too far down that road. But yeah, Darren,
Yeah, but
you're
I think-
exactly right with easements. Like
I think
you-
what Darren said was pretty clear.
Mhm.
That's true.
He's going to end up saying it over and over again if we don't write it down somewhere. So if you've got some language already,
yeah, that's exactly how an easement works though, is you own the property, whatever, at some point in time, someone who owns the property signed off some rights
Mhm.
away or gave rights to access to maintain infrastructure or something like that. So there's like, yeah, for utility pruning, for example, we don't even always have easements, but where we do have easements, we can come in, have language, we can trim a tree, remove a tree based on, whatever, our criteria is. And yeah, it varies from property to property.
Mhm.
Ingress and egress is the main part of it.
And then I guess my only other comment is wondering if we want to have a specific section about permitting. Or if that's clear enough throughout the ordinance of like when a permit is required and how to obtain a permit.
I think it would probably be a good idea to have it in its separate,
Yeah.
just because it is mentioned in there, but it
Yeah.
doesn't really mention anything about it. I mean, it just, a permit would be required, but it doesn't really say
Mhm.
what's involved with the permit. So I
Mhm.
think that would be a good, have its own
Yeah.
section that talks about that, I think.
Just
would
make
be
it
good.
really clear.
Well, and that's the whole thing
Yeah.
is if you don't make it clear and then all of a sudden it gets fuzzy and everyone's all, well, you never
Mhm.
said.
Right, then you can't enforce it. Yeah.
Exactly.
In adjacent owner responsibility, planting or removing a tree will need to have a right-of-way permit.
Mhm.
Correct. That's what we're talking about
Mhm.
here.
So is there a difference? I'm just being a resident
Mhm.
here. Is there a difference between a permit and a right-of-way permit?
No, because the right of way permit would be the permit. It's not a building permit or anything like that.
So either use that term everywhere you say permit or take that out, just say permit.
Yeah, we would change that. It would need to all be right of way permit
Mhm.
as far as permits are concerned.
So I had a thought about removal of stumps that in a way is also kind of the most prominent, pardon the pun, example of sort of a thing I see throughout is kind of really everything in here is kind of framed around the typical tree that we're looking at would be a street tree. But since we're talking about all public trees, that spans a whole wide spectrum of conditions. And like if we have to do annual maintenance pruning and stump grinding on every cottonwood tree in Meldrum Bar Park or everything that's halfway to a snag in the nature park, then we're potentially signing up for a lot of work and a lot of natural resources damage. So it might make sense to kind of have a strong restriction or strong regulations around street trees and perhaps a little bit more permissive regulations around sort of park trees, and then maybe natural resource area trees are kind of a little more hands off. Because otherwise we're kind of doing really intensive maintenance on everything, even where it doesn't always make sense.
Yeah, I guess my question there would be, does the city differentiate between like naturalized areas, city parks, and sort of the blurred lines that a lot of the times happen there? And because I think when we're talking about the removal of stumps and the recommendation specifically under that, it's like safety concerns in
Mhm.
parks. So we do want to have that in parks in certain situations, but you're right, it's nuanced, so maybe it makes sense to
So maybe
differentiate.
yeah, I was gonna say that, or define where stumps could be left,
Mhm.
type of a thing, in
Yeah.
like a natural area. I'm just thinking like down at Meldrum Bar Park, in an area where there's really nobody, and you remove a tree.
Then you'll have to add natural area to the definitions too.
You could put something in for parks and things like that, that's at the discretion of the director or something like that. But then like right of way is an always, you know.
So stump removal would be primarily on street trees. Is that what we're thinking?
Yeah, street trees and sometimes parks.
Yeah, I think it's dependent on the location of where it is for the most part. I mean, you don't want to leave a stump in the middle of a planter strip. I mean, we want that removed, but if it's in the middle of, well, let's use a nature park, someplace where there's not going to be a lot of people moving around in the area, you know, if you take it, cut it down and leave it as habitat, you could go that route. So I would say that it would be more of a natural area. And then if we define that, then we can make a change to that under there.
Do we also have stump defined?
I don't think so.
Okay. Sorry, I'm like the definitions person today. I just seen like people with the definitions run into issues, so.
I think we can add a stump speech.
If there's a stump that's been there for a long time and this ordinance goes into effect, is the homeowner responsible to get that stump ground now? The tree's been out for 10 years or so.
It'd probably be grandfathered
Yeah,
in.
I was gonna say more than likely.
Yeah, my old house in Arlington, big stumps. They've been there forever and they covered them with ivy. So problem solved.
These aren't solved, but what's worse is the uneven sidewalk that was caused by the trees
Yes.
to those stumps. And still uneven.
Anything else? All right, well, we'll make edits in the document. If you can think of anything more that you would like to change, the sooner you could get it to us, the better.
Actually, I was going to say, we're under a tight deadline. Next Tuesday, Darren and I've got to try to get these changes done for the packet. So I would hold off on anything else until after the work session, because again, it's still a working document. But next Tuesday is our packet deadline to put a draft ordinance in there. So, and we'll be set up just like this. The council will be sitting down in a round table with the tree board, and we'll just go through the ordinance, and there may be more things that you want to bring up, and that's fine to do that. And there might be elected officials that also want to add things. But that's the purpose of the work session. The
Thursday.
23rd.
I thought it changed to the 25th.
No, it's the 23rd, Tuesday, the 23rd.
Tuesday, the 23rd at 5:30.
All right. Well, if we don't have anything else, I think we can call it complete.
Is our next meeting August 2nd?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I won't be able to attend that one. Sorry, been pretty good.
That's fine.
And I won't be on the 23rd. Earlier it was said that was moved to the 25th. And so I was going to be okay, but well,
So that's during Chautauqua. And I think most of us will be down at
That
the park.
Friday
Yeah.
at 11.
Yeah, we can discuss if you want to change the meeting date. I know we won't be down there until Saturday, so. Do you want to change the meeting then?
We're not talking about the council session, right? We're talking
Correct.
about,
Correct. We're talking the next tree board meeting.
Just,
it's up to you guys. So I just can't make the next one, but
So that'd
think you
make it,
can
if we
make-
moved it, it would be the 9th then.
I would like to see us stick with the second. It's just an hour and it's earlier in the day and it seems like we could get it handled.
Okay, second.
And I won't be able to go to the city council.
And that's fine.
Okay.
I appreciate that you can come to these meetings, so.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming and we will see you on the 2nd, if not before.